This is Nate with Viva and Uncivil Law. What's up with the hats now? You're going full cowboy. You're a Northeasterner. Stop that fraud, man.
I don't know what you're talking about. The hat on my head and the flag on my wall says Texas, baby.
I'm going to go and now report you to the media because you are canceling. Got to cancel you, Texas, man. You're not from Texas.
Kurt, you do have to explain to the world what is so special about that hat. How long it took to make. It's an amazing thing.
Oh yeah, well this hat was custom made by hand by a guy in a company is him and his wife called Texas Hatters. They're the official Texas hat makers for Texas for the governor and all that stuff. It is made from 100% beaver, and this is a Gus style hat, and so you can really see the felt when you really put it up there. And because it was made for me by hand, it took 4 weeks to make and some amount of money.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is to all my people at PETA, I will give him the scolding later for his beaver hat. Save the beavers, baby. Save the beavers. Go ahead, Viva.
No, it's an amazing thing. Like when Kurt told me, I wasn't going to ask the price, but when Kurt told me it took.
You did ask me the price. That's the only reason I told you, Viva.
No, it's crazy. How
much was it?
It was $750.
What?
US. That's like $2,000 Canadian.
But you know what though?
But
I will say this:
you can buy hats that are more. You can buy hats that are more expensive than the off the shelf, and it was made by hand by a master who's got like 25 years experience. So
that's why you paid the $750. The hat looks great though. That is a great looking hat.
It is the most expensive piece of clothing I've ever purchased.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
Including my suits.
It is beautiful. I mean, the fact that it's made from beaver is. I didn't know that they made hats from beaver.
Oh yeah.
I ate the flesh of the beaver afterwards, so that the part of the animal didn't go to waste. But look at that.
Oops, trying to raise up. There it is. You're gonna go build a dam now, right? You're gonna go build a dam.
It's a Gus style, so that's why it says Gus. Made in Texas, United States of America. Beaver 100.
I'm gonna tell you one thing.
Made especially for me.
It sounds like that sounds like my wife when she goes and buys something extravagant. And then she tries to convince me that it was worth it, and I'm like, babe, you bought into the story. You didn't buy the product. So, but I think you have a great story behind the product, so it's worth $750 because you can keep telling the story.
Yeah, and you can buy hats that are more than expensive than that off the shelf, which is I think ridiculous because it's like why? You can go buy Stetsons. I've been looking online. You can buy them they're like $4,000 for some of these hats. I was like, why? It was made for me by hand. By a master. Why would you spend more than this?
A master hatsman.
It is amazing because I do know chefs and some of them have knives that are $30,000-$40,000. They are literally like the samurai swords out of Kill Bill, made with the same amount of love and care specifically for one person's hands, and they are like the way they keep them protected and the way they treat them. It's a thing of beauty. If you're into it, for someone like me, I use a butter knife.
And I picked the style. I picked the color. I picked this accent. So everything about it obviously is custom, because I got to choose everything. Got to choose the lining. So I went with this kind of gold lining. I thought that looked pretty good, So you get to pick all that stuff, and it'll last forever. People do, and because this guy who does it, he's 4th generation. So not only he a master, his father was certified by the Italians, with their highest hat making award and stuff like that. So it's in his blood. And people come back with hats made by his grandfather, and they're still in good condition, so it'll last forever.
Yeah, Kurt, we've got an expression in our house: it lasts forever until you lose it.
Well, I'm way ahead of you on that one. I've already had the nightmare in my head of losing this. I'm like, there's no way that I'm not going to lose this. But yeah, until that happens, it's a great hat.
One story. I mean, I got my backpack full of camera gear. And we were hiking in Vancouver, and after about 20 minutes, like, where's my camera bag? And I had left it on the ground by the river, and we had walked a kilometer or two, and I had to run back. And there's like insurable level stuff in there. And another time, we're in the zoo, the Living Desert Zoo in California. I realized at the end of the day, I came with my camera bag, and I don't have it anymore. But for the grace of people around me, and the fact that we live in a world where nobody really goes into people's unattended bags anymore.
Because they think they're bombs in them.
Especially when they open it up, the first thing they see are triggers for the camera. It went straight to security, and I got it back.
Oh my God! You know, it's wild. I remember there was when after 9/11 happened. Yeah. People used to leave bags around New York all the time, so you know people pick the bag. But after 9/11, every bag became a 9/11 style event. They empty the building. Oh my God, whose bag is this? You look at the bag, it's nothing. It's like, oh my God, we did all this for just this stupid bag. But you know, it's just the name of the times.
The other thing about it, by the way, is because my head is so big. My hat size is 8 3/8, so I can't buy hats off the shelf. So I literally went to several different stores to try to buy a hat, and I couldn't do it. So having it made was the only way to go.
Is that 8 3/8 in what is it? The radius?
No, to get it into inches, right? You'd multiply by pi. So that's 26 inches, and it's about 67 centimeters.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, you're a math whiz because I don't know how you did that.
Yeah, to get to your hat size, you divide the circumference of your head in inches by pi. That's your hat size.
3.1415923589733, and I think that's where
84626 43383.
Damn.
27950 288 97169.
These guys are math wizards because I know 3.14, and that's all she wrote. Anything more than that is computer generated stuff. So,
well, you know, if Viva's going to try to outgeek me, you know, we'll see what we can do, right? So,
we have to tell the crowd though about two things. Number one, don't spoil any Supreme Court.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court as at this exactly this moment, because they render their decisions at 10. No decisions from today. So if Tulsa's no longer part of the union, it'll have to wait because I'm doing it for myself. So no spoilers. No Supreme Court decisions that are happening right now.
But the thing is that soon as
I'll tell you what I think is going to happen if you care about that.
As soon as you click off this stream, you're going to see the headlines. So do you not want to know the result, or do you just not want to? Because the results you're going to know before you read the case.
No, I put my phone. I won't. I put my phone down. It's on mute. I have nothing telling me what is going on. So as soon as the stream is done, I'm going to start a new stream on my own channel. And I'm going to go to the SCOTUS blog, and I'm just going to, because at the top they have the links. And I'll just get the links, and I'm doing awesome law done quick. So the last couple of days, when the Supreme Court has been announcing, they've been announcing at 10-minute increments. So that gives me 10 minutes to read, understand, and explain each case. So we're doing awesome law done quick on my channel.
Today, the big case though, right, is the Trump tax case.
The tax records. There's one dealing with employment law for religious schools. That's kind of interesting. And if half of Oklahoma is secretly Indian territory or not is pretty big. Those are the big ones that I'm expecting.
Well, the tax return one I think is going to be huge because let's not forget. Now, for some reason, people think I'm in love with Democrats only. Listen, Democrats are politicians, scumbags, just like the Republicans. I think they're all scumbags. So let's just be honest with you. Yeah. And let's not be kidding ourselves. The Democrats want those tax returns to release them to the public to hurt.
Of course they do.
Right? This is not. Let's just stop the whole BS. Well, the law says they can have. No. They want the tax returons to release them.
Those will be leaked about 5 seconds after they get shared with the committee. No problem.
It
was one of our interns.
For one of my liberal friends out there who think they're all the Democrats, that's BS, bull, right?
Yeah.
But I do have a problem. I honestly want Trump to win this case, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I do not think that Congress should have the ability to go to Viva personally and say, we just want to see your tax returns. Yeah. I think they should have a generalized need to see, let's say we want to see attorneys' tax returns to see how things go or something like that. But just to pick one person out and say, I want your tax returns, I think is akin to a bill of attainder. What do you guys think?
Well, there's an equal protection issue, but I won't go with bill of attainder. But go ahead.
But what is the basis, to summarize for someone who might not be totally familiar with it? What is the basis for which they are requesting Trump's tax returns?
Officially, it is to look at potential ethics reforms and ethics disclosures with requirements on what people have to report in terms of financial conflicts of interest and things like that, whether or not there needs to be reforms in terms of that, because government officials have to make various disclosures about financial holdings and financial interests. And so their official reason is by looking at that, we might realize we need other rules than the ones we have.
And the key point is that there's a provision in the law that says Congress shall receive tax returns if the committee requested from the IRS. The IRS shall turn over tax returns that the committee asks for, so the committee can do whatever they want to do. So that language in the law seems to make it compulsory. But the Trump administration is saying, no, it's not compulsory. You have to give us a sufficient reason. You can't just say we want this guy's tax return to be turned over. Give us a sufficient reason. Yeah. So the Democrats are saying, no, the language in the statute says we don't have to give you a reason, but we'll give you one. But the argument isn't that they need a reason. It's that the language in the statute demands that they get it, that they should get it regardless of whatever their reason is.
Okay, and now am I mistaken in that one of the counter arguments from Trump is that while he has not provided his tax returns per se, he's provided summary forms, and therefore that is sufficient for all intents and purposes?
Yeah, that is that. But the case law is such that Congress, when it's issuing these subpoenas or requests, it does have to have a valid legislative purpose. Now, I can't remember whether it's been once or twice total that the Supreme Court has said, no, you don't have a valid legislative purpose. And the last time was either 50 or 100 years ago. So it's been a little bit since they said you don't have a valid legislative purpose. And as I pointed out, there are reasons to ask for the president's records. I think Nate's point is correct, that if they were coming after my individual records, it would be more of an issue of equal protection, and I'd have some constitutional interest in that. But the president of the United States is in a particular position, and so looking at that particular position's tax records makes sense in terms of particular legislative focus. So I am predicting, my prediction, which the Supreme Court may have already said is wrong. So I'm making a prediction in face of a thing that may not be true, but I'm predicting that they are going to say yes, that the Congress can get their tax records, and yes, that New York State's district attorney for the District of Manhattan can get the tax records too. They have valid purposes, and we can't look behind the veil, even though the language is clear on its face. So all of us textualists are like, well, the text is pretty clear. The case precedent is pretty clear. We just need a valid legislative purpose. I can think of a couple off the top of my head.
Hold on.
It's not even presidential records. It's personal records. Kurt. So we're not even going after the office of the president. So we don't even have a separation of powers problem.
Kurt, slow up. You got now Kirk has slipped that in about him being a textualist. Viva, I'm assuming, Viva, you know the difference between textualist and originalist, right?
And I was going to say, we have the same interpretation of statutes and in laws in Canada, where when it says shall, it is obligatory. When it says may, it is optional. And when it says can, it's discretionary. So typically when the law says something shall be done, there is no discretion.
But one thing is that is the reading of the law. Kurt has always been an originalist, and meaning is that when the law was first written, Kurt's understanding was always, well, what did the people who wrote the law at the time meant by the law? And then that's how we should interpret or understand the law, even in today's time. But Kurt has now made this huge change from originalism to textualism, because now he believes textualism is the better way to go. And textualism is, you read the words on the page, but then what do the words mean? Kind of just in common parlance, today's standards. Is there a logical reason why the word should be read this way? That's more of the textualist approach. Like, for instance, the comment with the sex opinion from the Supreme Court. It all turned on what the word sex meant. Now, in 1964, the Supreme Court said, not the Supreme Court, the legislature said sex didn't mean LGBTQ. They specifically said that is not within the legislation. But now, textually, you can't say we're going to discriminate against people who are gay without appealing to sex, because you're saying because you're a man who likes another man based on sex, we're going to discriminate. But if it's a woman who likes a man, they're not going to discriminate. So now Kurt has changed his position from being an originalist to now a full-blown textualist, and now he seemed to have rebuked all his originalist leanings in the past. So I just want to make sure that's clear for everybody.
Yes.
We no longer have an originalist, the Scalia originalist, which is he is now a textualist.
Scalia old and busted, Gorsuch is the new hotness. Oh.
That's right.
Nate, it was the second going to the Roberts decision on sex, where a lot of people were saying the law Gorsuch specifically excluded sex as including LGBTQ.
Yes.
My understanding at the time it was silent on that. It was only in subsequent proposed amendments that they wanted to insert LGBTQ, and the amendments were opposed for whatever the reason. But the original law was silent on it because it was something that was arguably not contemplated at the time.
No, it was. It was absolutely contemplated at the time. I actually went to the legislative history. What happens is back in 1964, they wanted to pass the amendment. They wanted to pass the I keep saying the Equal Rights Amendment, the Civil Rights Amendment. And what happens is that in southern states, they couldn't get enough support to actually pass it. So the Republicans in Congress actually had a filibuster for the Civil Rights Amendment. What happens is that the Democrats started getting more votes to pass the amendment, and when it got close, the Republicans who wanted to defeat the legislation instituted the amendment specifically to expand it to LGBTQ community. So that would actually be within the legislation. The Democrats didn't add it to the legislation because they found it to be a poison pill. They said that if that is in the legislation, it's going to fail because you're talking about 1960s America. You know what I'm saying? So they were adding that in hopes that the bill would fail on its face. So the Democrats didn't add it. They specifically left it out. And that was the argument that Alito was making and Kavanaugh were making. And this argument was saying that Congress had this issue, they looked at it, they argued it, and they refused to add it to the legislation. Now that the Supreme Court comes 30 years later and saying, well, it really does mean this, makes them a super legislature.
It turned out it was inside us the whole time. Who knew? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what had happened. So, but I do agree. I actually agree more with the dissent about the logic, because what bounds does the Supreme Court have now? They can just change it nilly-willy just today. Okay, well, guess what? Even though we know for a fact you didn't want it to mean that, it means that. You've effectively changed the legislation. You've effectively amended the legislation from what it was.
Yeah, so now this is a challenge between Alito, Kavanaugh on one hand and Gorsuch on the other. It's like, who is more loyal to the conservative legal principles between the two? And I do take one exception from some of the discussion where people have been arguing based on outcome. I'm like, that's the wrong way to think about it. So if you don't like it from policy, like, I understand, but that's the wrong way to think about it legally.
Hey, this one, it says, I would have sent this to uncivil law, but he's turned off his function. Oh, you turned off your super chat?
I just turned off all live chat because I'm rebroadcasting this. So I turned off live chat on my stream because there was no point. So yeah.
Oh, but thanks for letting us participate, Nate. Well, if you want, if Jason, send me another link if you want me to send him the $50 Canadian, but it's minus 1/3. So just let me know if that's really just for uncivil law. I don't want to take your super chat, man.
Well, I turned it off also. I turned it off for a very specific reason as well. I turned it off for two reasons, because normally I would leave it on. But first, it's like putting all the comments in one place because I'm rebroadcasting this and I put it in my description. And the other reason is I don't want spoilers on the Supreme Court. And so that you can look at the chat, because I'm not looking at the chat of this stream. Okay, I don't want to spoil this because people are probably in chat right now. Like, didn't you just see what happens? Like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I will watch the game later.
Nate, Kurt, I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm reading the chats as they go through. Incidentally, I have two predictions on this, because I do think that the tax returns are going to be ordered to be produced. I think they ought to have been communicated back in 2016 when the whole argument got started. And this is where I always got into, like, I say, political arguments where I could agree with people who said, Trump should have communicated his tax returns. I could understand what the other people are saying is that he communicated enough to let you know where his holdings were if there were a conflict.
Yeah.
I think when you're running for public office, you sort of abandon certain private issues that might have otherwise been legitimate arguments against. But my second prediction is that there's going to be nothing in here, that this was a red herring of a sideline dispute from the very beginning, because Lord knows sure as sugar, if there was anything compromising in his tax returns, they would have been leaked already. They don't need to be leaked by the Democrats.
I think that's right. I think the most embarrassing thing about them might be that Trump isn't as rich as he's been fronting. So that will be the only thing embarrassing about them. I don't think there's anything in there that's going to be like,
I don't think that's going to happen, because once you have unquantifiable things of value like brand and how you value the Trump brand, you could and knowing accounting principles, one can say that one is much more wealthy just based on an arbitrary value that they attribute to a brand, or goodwill, or intangibles. But I don't think there's going to be anything compromising in there.
So short of a Supreme Court justice retiring or something, I don't want to know. If a Supreme Court justice decides they go retire, we could switch to talking about that. But short of that, it's like I'll deal with it later. Yeah.
That'd be three picks in 4 years. That'd be tremendous. For
it'd also be a pick during an election year, which we're not allowed to do.
Nah, of course you know they're gonna make that pick. I would make that pick. That's
I did see on the news. I saw on the news yesterday that a month ago, and apparently we're just learning about it now, that a month ago Roberts hit his head and went to the hospital and had to have some sutures.
Can you imagine? Like it's such a political position that certain things need to be kept secret or not disclosed to avoid some sort of public panic or politicizing of further politicizing of a process.
I thought there was a rumor that Roberts was looking to retire, which seems a little unlikely. He's pretty young. He's early 50s or maybe 60s.
I think he's in his 60s right now.
And I was like, if he does retire, it's like, well, you could make Kagan Chief Justice because I think she'd do an excellent job. And then you could nominate Amy Coney Barrett to replace her. So you get your first woman Chief Justice and make them a package deal and watch the Senate go insane as they try to figure that one out.
All right. So quick question. Who, if let's say if Roberts wasn't able to be Chief Justice or, he got sick and he had to retire, who would actually be Chief Justice until they replaced him?
Well, presumably the acting Chief Justice would be the most senior justice, which is Thomas.
Which is Clarence Thomas. So yeah. So if Roberts is unable, then Thomas would be acting Chief Justice.
For the ignorant Canadians or people who may not know, does the Chief Justice have any? Do they carry any additional influence, or do they have any specific functions?
Yes, just what happens is all justices are actually associate justices, and one is elevated to Chief Justice. The Chief Justice decides who writes the opinions. They actually make more money as Chief Justice, and they are the function leader of the court. Go ahead.
It's just like it's a little bit. It's not like a huge amount of money, but they do make a little bit more. Yeah. They get an extra clerk.
Beg your pardon?
Yeah.
How much do the Supreme Court justices make in the States?
I think it's like 280. I'll look at it right now. Supreme Court justice.
I think it's as much as like the Speaker of the House makes. So I would say 240. So something like $250,000. Not as much as Judge Judy who makes like $5 million a year.
Yeah, an associate justice makes $213, and Chief Justice makes $223. So Chief Justice makes $10,000 more.
That's interesting. I think our judges in Canada, last time I checked, Superior Court justices make $270, give or take. I think that's still right. Canadian, which is a third less in the U.S.
Yeah, so you're not in it for the money because these people would make that, tripping over themselves in the private sector. When clerks leave the Supreme Court, they typically get a bonus of about that much, just as a signing bonus. So clerks get, when they leave, because it's usually a 1-year term, when you're a clerk, when they leave, they get like $250,000 signing bonus. So you can imagine how much these guys would make in the private sector. I mean, they'd be raking it in. So it's definitely not about the money. It's about the love of law, right?
It's funny. I have a friend who's been out for about 4 years out of law school, and he's making something like, I think, $300,000 a year, and his signing bonus was something like $50,000 or $60,000. It's like insane. But he works for a big downtown firm, so it's just that type.
Well, is it the same thing in the States? In Canada, the judges if they make $270, they make $270 for the rest of their lives. When they retire or pass away, their spouses make $270 for the rest of their lives. When they retire, they make a certain amount for the rest of their lives. So it might be more of a, when you get paid.
For example, I know they get a pension, and you can also retire rather than resign if you're old enough, and I think you get paid the same still.
Yeah, Trump's sister just retired a couple of years ago, and she gets a $200,000 pension for life a year. So if you retire, you get $200,000 rather than getting kicked off.
Do they command the same speaking fees once they retire from public government officials?
Well, Trump's sister probably would, as to what she wants to say. I'm sure she could rake in somebody.
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, so what about because if we keep talking about the Supreme Court, those rulers are going to start kicking the chat. We're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Yeah. Oh, sorry, we can't talk about that. So
we can talk about the stuff that happened yesterday or any day before today.
First, we got to congratulate our boy Barnes. Barnes is the elite attorney. I was watching reading in the New York Times just today. Robert Barnes talks for Central Park Karen. I was like, yo, there it is, go Barnes. So Barnes is representing Central Park Karen.
It's amazing. I don't know if it's lucrative, but it's an amazing thing to. Well, first of all, it's an amazing thing where the Central Park Karen story has gone to. I mean, it's gone to levels that whether or not Chris Cooper was sort of in the wrong, I say in the wrong in a certain sense, whether or not he appreciated what would happen when he or his sister made that video public. I think even he now appreciates that what's happening is beyond proportionate response to the incident.
Well, he said as much like the day after the event on like Anderson Cooper or something like that.
Yeah,
he was interviewed and said that.
I mean, there's people who are who have not read the book, so you've been publicly shamed, who are not internet savvy, who don't know how it works, who don't appreciate how these things just explode and take a life of their own. So I'm sure he doesn't like it now. He doesn't want to participate. But the fact that they're pressing charges for having filed a false police report, a misdemeanor charge for filing a false police report. I mean, it's and Mayor de Blasio, with all that else is going on in New York City that is making the headlines, he's taking to Twitter to boast how proud he is about this. We're living through bizarro times where the emphasis is being placed on the wrong things and neglect is being blessed on the wrong things as well. I call it the Parkinson's law of triviality, in that it's easier for de Blasio to focus on Central Park Karen than on the skyrocketing murder rates in New York.
Well, just the point of contention here is that this is really the DA. When I was at the DA's office, even though the mayor does have some control over funding for the DA's office, it's really the DA who's made this decision. The DA is the one who made this decision. The mayor actually had nothing to do with it. But I do agree. The premise that this was serious enough to file charges is utterly ridiculous. And I'll say that to anybody. This is a ridiculous case. I don't think, and to be honest with you, I think there's a real argument that her complaint wasn't frivolous. It wasn't just some naked complaint. She was actually, the guy did say things that you could consider to be threatening.
But you realize, like, Nate, we live in a world where there's going to be a meaningful portion of the population who are going to be largely unaware of the Facebook post that Chris Cooper, his sister, posted, where Chris Cooper basically said, where he said what he said. If you're going to do what you want to do, I'm going to do what I'm going to want to do, and you're not going to like it. Come here, doggy. Verbatim.
Yeah.
There are people who are unaware that occurred. And so when they see this video and the police report, they're going to say, yeah, that looks like a total false police report. It's not to say it was a proportionate response on her end, and I had my own theories. Someone called me a good doctor that I could, say that I think this woman has serious diagnosable anxiety disorders. You don't need to be a doctor to be a human, and to look at her and say that was not a reasonable response. That is a response of someone who's got issues, and I say that non-judgmentally. But whether or not it was proportionate, the people who don't know the first incident of what Chris Cooper said to her prior to the call, prior to the recording, will look at this and say it makes sense. People who know that are going to say this is ridiculous. I appreciate the DA acts on his own, Nate, but we're living in a political environment where people are feeling political pressures to make certain public decisions. There's no question the DA is feeling the pressure, and de Blasio is, patting him on the back for doing the hard thing.
Well, I tend to be of a slightly different mind, because I do think that there are people who make false reports, and I think that those are not prosecuted enough in a lot of cases, particularly when it relates to false claims of a more prurient assault nature, if you catch my drift, where people make false claims and they're not prosecuted. So I think the idea of what this woman did in terms of her report and some of the things that she said might have been beyond the pale. I don't think it's quite as ridiculous personally. I think she has some reasonable defenses that you guys have alluded to, that the statements that he made could be viewed as threatening, and he's confessed to those statements, so those are all admissible, obviously. So she does have some good causes there, but I don't quite view it as absurd, because I think that people use the police as a tool of personal, what's the right word here?
I say vendetta or grudge.
Yeah, personal vendetta, rather than for the public purpose of ensuring the public good. And I think that some of that needs to be corrected. So I have a slightly more nuanced take, I think.
Well, and you know what? First, let me read the super chat. Jason McConnell, thanks again, Jason, for your $40 Canadian super chat. I appreciate it. It says that Canadian Supreme Court justices make $373,000 a year, and the chief. We need to move to Canada to get some real justice right here. Yeah, my God, Viva told about 260.
Does Canada need some judges available, man?
You try to keep us away from drawing in.
I'm still wearing the cowboy hat though in Canada, though, so they got to deal with that.
First of all, that's Supreme Court versus Superior Court. So we got Superior Court, then Court of Appeal, then Supreme Court as well. But I only know provincially what I think.
So you're telling me some low-level judge makes $373?
No, that's the Supreme
Court.
Oh, okay, geez, Lord.
The low level makes $270, and the low level. And I don't know what municipal judges make, but anyways, it's interesting.
And this is Turner. Thanks again for the super chat. This is $5 from Turner. Doesn't giving up its returns opens up to precedent for other records when it comes to mind Obama's school records and birth certificate. Well, those records are state records, not federal records. The tax returns under the purview of the federal government versus the state government. So
there's a statute that specifically allows Congress and its committees to get the tax records specifically. So they have a specific authorization that is going to carry the day.
Incidentally, the 4D level chess that a lot of people are probably thinking Trump is also playing is that he wants to lose this suit so that he can then use this precedent against all the other Democrats and maybe the ones who are inside trading, selling off stock prior to the pandemic being announced. This is going to be a double-edged sword because it's not just going to work on president, but Democrats don't like it. It's going to apply to everybody.
Well, that means, the Senate, which is in Republican hands, can start issuing its own subpoenas for their own tax records. It might think are interesting when it relates to ethics and, favoritism and all that stuff. It's like, are there any politicians or politicians' kids whose records we might want to get a hold of? I can't think of any, but I'm sure someone will come to mind eventually.
But the only issue that you have is that most at the presidential level, they all release them anyway. Like Obama released 10 years. So Trump is like the first one not to release them, which I think is, to be honest with you, out of all the presidential elections I've seen, I've never once looked at, look at this guy's tax return.
Really, I've never looked at
who does that?
I don't
this
know.
only became an important issue because it's Trump. That's really it. It just if they never released him, who would actually care?
It'd be hilarious if it turns out that he's richer than anyone ever thought. Be like, that'd be the real 40 chess.
Oh my God, that would be real. Go ahead.
You know what I want? I don't want to see the tax returns. I mean, first of all, I don't care. It's relevant to see them before they run. I want to see the tax returns for the 10 years after they cease office to see how they are profiteering from their former service, public service. they make a sacrifice, which in theory and in reality is actually nothing more than a massive investment into speaking fees for the next 10 years, and they live. They buy multi-million-dollar mansions after their.
It's good work if you can get it, man. I'd get that hustle all day long. No problem.
But let's not forget though, that's all income too, because your housing is taken care of, security is taken care of, food. Don't forget when you leave the office of president, you still have all those presidential perks, but you just don't have that authority to do stuff. So it's all cash. When you get $10 million, you're not paying for rent, you're not paying for. You're just living your life. You know what I'm saying? So it's good to be a former president. And what was Clinton's speaking fees? Like $2 million an occasion?
I think
crazy.
This is a nonpartisan thing. I don't care if it's. I think Obama was charging $650 for speeches afterward. It should not happen for anybody in politics, because all that it ends up looking like and effectively being like is. It's pre-bribery. It's pre-corruption in that make the right decisions while you're in office, and we will feed you healthily when you leave office. And I genuinely believe it's money laundering because it is just taking massive wealth that is disproportionate to the services. It's like selling a nail for $1 million after, and it only happens after they leave office once they've done whatever they've done in office. It's offensive.
It's one thing I do have to disagree with you though on civil law, and it's a different perspective about the Karen case, is because 10 years in law enforcement, then doing the prosecution, I've had so many false reports, I can't count them, but I can tell you this: how many have I ever seen prosecuted when I was at the prosecutor's office, or even when I was in law enforcement? Zero. And I'm talking about everything from I was armed robbed right here, and we see the camera, and a person wasn't armed robbed. I'm talking about every type of fake police report that you could possibly think of. I've seen it happen, and never have I seen any of those people prosecuted. And I was in Manhattan. I was in that jurisdiction. So now, all of a sudden, these weren't phone calls. These weren't just phone calls. These were people coming in, filling out reports, signing their name under penalty of perjury, and they were never prosecuted. Now you have this woman who makes a phone call, the police show up, nobody's even there, and then for them to go out of their way to prosecute this woman, I just think, and the reason why I find it offensive, it's the selective prosecution piece of it. All right,
Well, that I will
but
concede
now
your
this
point.
This is not what they would do. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I will concede your point on that one, because the fact that we're targeting this woman when we wouldn't go after other people, and so that was kind of part of my comment where I was like, well, I think that we should probably be doing this more. The fact that they never did it ever in your experience is somewhat disturbing. My next question is why? It seems like pretty low-hanging fruit. It's like, well, we got this signed statement. Well, it seems like a pretty easy case. Are we bored? Do we not want to do something here?
To show you how bad this was, this has gotten. In the area that we were at, there was a young woman who said she was gang assaulted. I can't say the other word because of the BD.
Yeah, that's why I chose different language too.
She was gang assaulted, and the cops went and arrested these guys, and were prosecuting these guys. Right? She had said she was assaulted. The only thing that saved the guys is that one of them were secretly recording the encounter, and when they played the tape, they saw that it was actually the young lady who was fostering, hey, let's do this. She was the one saying that she wanted to do all this. And when she found out that one of the guys had told some people and, made her look like, it just made her look bad, then she went and screamed that she was assaulted in this way. And even in that case, they did not charge the young lady for one reason. They said because they believed that it would affect other victims and make them unlikely for them to come forward. So they said, we'll just let her go, even though we know this is fake. We know she did this, and then because it was the thought process with other victims. Now, my whole thing is, if the Manhattan DA can let that victim go, then why can't you let this woman in the park who says she was a little afraid? Why are we arresting this woman? That's the problem.
There's two things here. Also, first of all, I'm doing a video on this. If it's not today, it should be this afternoon. But the idea that they're calling this a false police report, and there's false reports being something that is visually or by the evidence absolutely untrue, and then there is mischaracterized, exaggerated, or potentially able to be interpreted differently with police reports. You got your, to use the big one, you got your Jussie Smollett false police report.
Yeah,
which is
times 11, baby.
To the extent you think it's false, to the extent you believe it's false,
it's false.
It's
false. He lost his double jeopardy claim too. Oh, he gets to go to jail. I'm so happy.
Well, so you have that type of level falseness. It didn't happen. Then you have your falseness where it did happen. Something happened. I just disagree with the way she's describing it to the police.
Exaggerated.
I mean, which is from calling it a false police report in and of itself, I think, is a problem because it's not false. One might think it was exaggerated. One might think it was motivated by something else. One might think it was unjustified. But to say that it was false. And the police report, police report was her phone conversation that we saw. It is.
I think between both your opinions, I'm going to have to change my opinion because I think both of you have made a better case than me. So between the two of you, you have convinced me that this is bad.
No, but
I'm flip flopping. I've changed my mind.
No, and Nate, the decision in this case is as purely political as what the DA did in Georgia with the
Don't even get us started on that.
Well, no, I think that one might be worse.
Yeah,
that one might be worse. That's pretty bad.
Yeah,
that one really irritates me so horribly because the idea that it's not self-defense, it's like I have a hard time comprehending that one in Georgia.
Well, I think anybody who has not seen Nate's 2 video breakdowns of it, will not is not fully informed on the subject. It's
that case is so disturbing to me because you know why? Because it's like I don't know if you guys saw Terry Crews with Don Lemon.
I did. What a thing, man! When we say Black Lives Matter, we don't mean all Black lives. We just mean some of them.
Yes, and one thing that did for even for me. Like I consider myself to be a supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement, but then listening to Terry Crews actually explain the differences and what he meant, and I was like, that's how I feel about it. I feel like Terry Crews feels about it. I believe the message is the right message, but I believe there's now an organization here, which I don't agree with all their points. To fund the police, I'm not with all that. I'm with
apparently Free Palestine for some reason.
Yeah, all that I'm not with. But I am with the overall aspirational message, and that's what he was trying to convey. And then Don Lemon, I don't know, it showed me how he is just a hack. Like I'm like, wow, this guy, he's not listening to the very well expressed nuanced point. And then at a point, for like 10 minutes, Don Lemon is just talking and not even letting. I'm like, you brought this guy on for him to talk, and you're making a speech about Black Lives Matter. I don't, what the hell's going on?
No, but and it was an amazing thing where Don Lemon says, if you want something else, then go do something else. If you want to make it mean something else, then go do it. And it is as if to say that you can never address the inconsistencies or the weaknesses in someone else's life. You think if they're weak, go do your thing and go make it better. But first of all, Terry Crews is trying to do that. He is trying to make it better, and in so doing, he's being attacked left, right, and center by the very people that he is, by his own team, so to speak.
And Don Lemon's analogy was so weird too, because it's like going into Black Lives Matter and talking about this incident would be going into it, all cancers matter, and talking about HIV. And I'm like, no, because HIV is not a cancer. The analogy would be, it's like going into an all cancer lives matter and saying pancreatic cancer matters. Yes, because that's a type of cancer.
Kurt, I mean, I thought about that because the better analogy when he brought up the all cancer, cancer matters or combat cancer analogy, I thought he was going to say, but it exclude testicular cancer, but no. So he does. He goes into a totally different disease. Whereas the proper analogy would be, you have a group that says all cancer lives matter, but we're not paying attention to testicular cancer because for whatever the reason, well, testicular cancer survivors are going to take issue with that organization. And when he says like this, they're called, it's called Black Lives Matter, but they're only focusing on police brutality.
Yes.
And then Terry Crews says, well, no, they're not. They're talking about a lot of other things.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, they are. So he's just wrong on every possible level, because they're not talking about even just police reform. They're talking about Palestine and some other things. And it's like, and some Marxism apparently, and all kinds of other stuff, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I was under the impression that Black lives meant all, and maybe talking about gang on gang violence, or talking about inner city violence, or talking about a person who goes through a drive-through and their young child is shot in the back of their car because they went through the wrong drive-through, because that was now a space for protest or whatever. And maybe that person's lives matter. Maybe that would be a thing worthy of talking about. But apparently, no, not all Black lives, just some of them. So I don't know. Your life may not matter anymore. I don't know. It's very sad.
It is in debate and in law, debate strategy. It's a common tactic where you basically micro dissect the actual discussion so that it becomes impossible to discuss on the global scale or on the entire scale. You say, okay, no, it doesn't mean that, and that's a distraction. But Black Lives Matter means police brutality and police brutality only. Well, no, it doesn't, because they talk about other things. Yeah, but right now that's what we're talking about, and therefore just discredits the reality.
So it's magic. It means whatever we want to mean at any given time.
For the political purpose. And Terry Crews' point was just so simple. I should be able to criticize this and show where I find, and just for the fact that he did that as a black man talking about your Black Lives Matter, but we should be more specific and should understand it in a different way. He's now being criticized as anti-black. It's like we've gotten to the point where where the organization who is trying to help people in this position, and you can't criticize it in any way, no matter who you are, because if you criticize it, then you are now also a racist.
Did you see that video? Did you see that video from like a week or two ago, where is that white woman yelling in a black officer's face because how it's part of the system and all that? I'm like, wait a second, what's going on now?
No, but it's the other classic strategy of debate: control the meaning of words, and you control the dialogue.
Well, that's 1984. It's just words. We redefine everything. It means whatever we mean. There's nothing but the eternal present. Great.
I watched the Don Lemon interview with Terry Crews because I was expecting the way it was framed. I thought Terry Crews got owned by Don Lemon. Mm-hmm. It was, first of all, Terry Crews. He's braver than most.
Yes.
He's more eloquent than most, and he gets out there. And Don Lemon is. I dislike everything on CNN. But he meticulously explained his thought process in a way that, it's difficult to refute, and you cannot, when you control the debate.
He's a victim of assault. Aren't we supposed to believe all victims? So it's like, that too.
No, but to bring him on and then to browbeat him and to lecture him, to moralize him, like as if Terry Crews as if there's something wrong with the message of unity. It goes to show you that the mainstream media is not about unity. They don't make their money off unity. They don't make their money off promoting it. Yeah. And it is depressing to watch.
It exposed a flaw, and I think the flaw is that, and people say this about Trump, and I'm going to say it about Black Lives Matter too. It's the thought process that if you're not down with every single policy position, you're in some way against the movement. Like for me, I feel like, and this may be just my personal thing, but I always feel like I'm in this bubble that I can't get out of. I'm too left for people on the right, and I'm too right for people on the left. For instance, when I talk about abortion, I'm all for, women's right to choose, yes. But when we talk about the Second Amendment, I'm all for the Second Amendment. Yeah, give me my gun. These laws are ridiculous. But there's no place where I can go where people are, have those two opinions. It's either if I'm for the Second Amendment, I got to be against abortion. You know what I'm saying? That there's no nuanced opinion now.
There's no question, because there's no room for nuance, because it is a purity test where you have to agree with everything, and if you don't, you're a defector. And if you like someone, it means you have to agree with everything they say. And if you disagree with something they say, it means you dislike them. It is oversimplified, and it's the social media effect of discourse. It's that it's all or nothing on everything, and I am not all or nothing on anything. And
or in the alternative, in an alternate universe, maybe a couple people could come together and they could listen to each other, and maybe some of them could change their mind when they listen to other people, because these other people have really good points, and I can actually engage in a productive discussion and dialogue and learn something. What a novel concept!
It's an all or nothing on everything, where every issue becomes a fundamentally moralized issue. If you disagree with it, you're immoral, and that goes both, and it goes on both ways of the it goes on both sides. It just happens to be that the media is dominated by left-leaning ideologies, whereas you disagree with certain things, you're evil.
Yes, and I do want to make this point. People think that it's the right that are close to new ideas, and I'm going to be 100% honest. That Don Lemon interview should have shown you the left is just as close to other ideas too, because he wasn't saying Black Lives Matter. Terry Crews wasn't saying Black Lives Matter is bad. He was just saying, I have an issue with some of their policy positions, and he's been cast off the island. You know what I'm saying? So understand this, the extremes on both sides is the issue. It's not just right versus left. It is understanding that everybody's more nuanced. And someone like me, I agree with abortion, but I also agree with your right to bear arms. There's no state for me. You know what I'm saying? There's no state for me. It's either red or blue. So.
Well, no, and I'm just looking at Tony Nieves about the people talking about the mask. It's become the same issue with the mask, and it's because these symbols become symbols of something. And if you have any disagreement with the symbol or the way it's being implemented, you become you are in opposition to what that object represents, to what it symbolizes, and it's just a very superficial way of writing someone off based on individual ideas and writing them off as a whole.
Yes. Sorry,
I trying to figure out what it was telling me.
Just reading Jason Spurlock. That's the other thing is Twitter. I don't know that people say it represents 2% of the world, maybe less, maybe more. Yeah. But you have this vast vocal minority on Twitter and social media, which give the impression that they speak for the majority. And I guarantee you that 90% of us are sent a road like this, just reasonable, who will not unfriend somebody because we happen to disagree with them on a face mask, or we happen to disagree with them on the response to the pandemic. But the social media doesn't lead you to believe that that's the way the majority of people think.
Yeah, if you're not, we've gotten to a point with if you're not with us, you're against us, even if you're not with our crazy ideas. And I think that's the most dangerous part about it.
I seem to remember George Bush saying that, and I seem to remember the left at the time saying how ridiculous that is. And now apparently they've adopted in a whole new level of furor that the right didn't even know about. I was like, man, I don't even know the right was ever this selective, at least in recent memory. So it's like, man, Lord.
But it mostly has to do with controlling who has the greater influence in social media, in mainstream media, and in terms of giving the impression as to how prevalent it is and how commonplace it is and the implications of it. Because when the social media and media is so radically skewed one way, the collective punishment that they can impose on people like Terry Crews, who might have been on the left in the first place, it gives the impression that they control the debate, they control the dialogue, and they control the imposition of punishment.
Yes. And you'll never, and the fact of the matter is that you'll never know exactly what people what positions what true positions that people hold who are in that group, because I think people are just so afraid of being cast out of the group that you're holding that it seems like people are holding positions that they actually don't agree with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because they're afraid that if they say something different, the neighbor's actually going to call the cops and rat them out as being. I saw them bubbling with someone who was outside their bubble. But it also goes to show you that it really doesn't take very many people to change, to ruin things for everybody, and it doesn't take very many people to make everybody very suspicious. It just takes one or two people to ruin a community to some extent, and I mean that's. Oh, yeah,
I honestly think, like, at the end of the day, so we can move on from the NYC Karen, just so everybody understands what's going on with NYC Karen. The way, now, again, I'm talking about it from when I used to do these cases. My last case actually was in that same courtroom, the courthouse that they have her in. My last case was in. The last time I was in front of a judge was in criminal court down there, because I had a case with someone else with a misdemeanor. But what they've done is that they haven't actually filed any official charges. What they did, they gave her a DAT, which is we call them disappearance tickets, but they're called desk appearance tickets. And essentially, if you've committed a crime, instead of me arresting you and taking you to central booking and processing you, I'll give you essentially a summons. And that summons will tell you to come to court on a particular date to be arraigned on these misdemeanor charges. And that's what she's gotten. So there's no complaint. There's no official court documents. This is just the precinct gave her a summons and said, you have to come to court on this particular day. And that's what she has now. So that's what that means, pressing charges. And the way it happens, the way I'm thinking this happened, is that the DA does that sometimes too. The DA will call the precinct and say, well, you know what, we believe this person should get a DAT, should be arrested and get a DAT. And then we'll fill it out and then give the person a DAT. And it's just like if they were arrested, it's a document that we give in lieu of an arrest. So we'll give you, instead of arresting you, we give you that document. You've officially been arrested, and now you have to show up to court. So she's not been arraigned, and that all happens in October. So there's nothing going to happen until that time.
Bottom line, she has to appear back at court. She is going to be arraigned, and she is going to face charges, and they're going to determine. Well, I mean, they're going to determine what charges to impose, I guess, or what to go after. But how often they do? I mean, what would be the process for the DA to eliminate or revoke or retract a DAT? Can they do that?
Well, yes. Well, what generally happens here is that no DA has probably even seen the official DAT yet. What used to happen with us is that DATs were usually put 3 to 4 months ahead of time. So let's say if you get a DAT now, you don't have to show up to court for 3 months. So we don't actually fill out the complaint until, let's say, like 2 weeks before you have to come in. Then we would get the DAT. We would see the charges, and then the DAs, we would say what charges we want to put, because sometimes the cops' charges aren't the charges that we would actually arraign you on. So we'll look at the charges, we'll fill out our complaint form, and then we'll issue it to the court. So the charges that she has now may not be the same charges that she's actually arraigned under, but generally they are. So right now, as of right now, what are they saying? It's a misdemeanor false report. But the plain meaning of this, what I really want to say is that those charges that she is under right now, generally you get what they call an ACD. That's an adjournment and contemplation of dismissal, where if you're a good person for 6 months, it's like the case never happened. The charges go away. And that's what generally is the disposition for a case like this. She should get an adjournment and contemplation of dismissal, and none be the wiser. Like, you really don't even need an attorney for this. But I think because this is a political prosecution, they may be looking for something else. Because again, she's a first-time offender, never had any problems with the criminal justice system. This is a first offense, which is a phone call. So, there should be no jail time, no nothing. She should be.
But that idea that she should be grateful that it just disappears with no further consequence is almost like, thank you, Big Brother, for not punishing me more for something that I should never have been punished for in the first place. And exactly. I fundamentally object to that. And I mean, there's a part of me that says not only should she not have had suffered this in the first place, but at what point, when you say selective prosecution, and we were DMing on this, at what point does selective prosecution become malicious prosecution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is so selective. It is so politicized that I wonder when the threshold is met for this becoming malicious prosecution. And something I forgot to mention earlier, incidentally. The articles, New York Times is mentioning that they don't have the cooperation of Chris Cooper. Some people might think that they don't have Cooper's cooperation because he might potentially be guilty of his own infraction of having tried to lure her dog away from her, which Robert Barnes says it's a third-degree felony.
Yeah, it's like a felony.
I don't know. Other people said that he was misreading the statute. I'm going to just, double check for my own edification. But some people might say that he's not cooperating because his hands might not be totally clean in all of this. And but it's all nonsense. It is nonsense. And it is divisive. It drives a wedge between members of communities.
Well, just people know this is going to be a judge trial because there's no jury for these misdemeanor trials, right? You only get juries when for certain misdemeanor trials like Class A, but this is not going to be. This will be a judge trial. So the deck is stacked against this woman getting anything more than slap on the wrist and go home and be a good person. But again, I think you're right. I think the political piece of it is the problem that most people are going to have a problem with, because again, they don't do this to anyone else. This is just for this woman in this particular circumstances. But I also want to put one last point out there to you guys. I don't think legally we can really be too mad, because this is what they call prosecutorial discretion, right? This is textbook prosecutorial discretion. I can prosecute whoever I want for whatever crimes, and because of scarce resources, just because I prosecute you and not prosecute this person doesn't mean that it's prosecutorial misconduct. I'm prosecuting those people who commit crimes. I can't get them all, but I got you. Well, prosecutorial discretion.
It is not going to instill confidence in the general population of New York as to how the police department is operating.
Well, listen. So our last piece of it? So obviously the coronavirus is like big in the news, and now I think in the United States we had 60,000 new cases last night. I'm trying to understand the strategy here now, because obviously, like, there's certain places that are still reopening even with these surge in cases, but the death rate has been tremendously low, and people are trying to say the death rate's going to go up. But what do you guys think, especially you, Kurt, because you're in the middle of the epicenter now. It was me, but now it's you. So how's it been going down there?
Apparently, I'm in the middle of things here in Travis County, Texas, Austin, where we have the most new cases. I think the last week or 2 weeks ago, we had most of any county in the U.S. in terms of increases. Personally, I think that that we are, first of all, the entire point of flatten the curve, lest we forget, was merely to spread out the total number of diseases. It wasn't to change the total number of people who got infected. It was simply to spread it out over a longer period of time so that the hospital system wouldn't be overloaded. And that doesn't appear to be happening even in Texas, much to the news reports to the contrary. It appears to be that there are plenty of hospital beds, and they were still doing even elective surgeries. And some of those hospital beds were being taken up from that. I think they just stopped those recently in the last day or two. So there seems to be hospital capacity. So the whole idea of flattening the curve was never to reduce the total number of infections, wasn't even to reduce the total number of people who died from COVID. It was to make sure that the hospital system didn't get overwhelmed, so that someone who got in a car accident couldn't be treated because there were so many people being treated from COVID, there wasn't a space for that person. So it was to prevent secondary or ancillary deaths. So in terms of flattening the curve, I think we got there. If the point of it was not to overwhelm the system, there's no sign of that happening as far as I can tell. It never happened in New York. They had those field hospitals, which went unused. They're talking about trying to convert a convention center down here in Austin, but there appears to be no need to do that as far as I can tell, based on any geographic or geometric projections I can tell from infection rates, because infection rates go up, but there's so many people getting infected, and we're taking these new measures and so forth and so on. So the first thing I would say is, I think we did flatten the curve. We accomplished the objective. The second thing I would say is that I think that as you've pointed out, the ability to get a vaccine or viable treatment is, we're looking at a multi-year project. And what we're willing to tolerate in the long term in terms of the society, in terms of how we're willing to really impact our lives, is something that needs to be discussed. The constant shuttering and unshuttering of businesses is not sustainable. It costs money to do that. People lose money in that process. They'd actually be better off just keeping it closed, because restarting things takes effort and money. And I don't know that we're willing to let bars remain closed for years, and there'd be no bars left after that, because they'd just be all underwater. So what we're willing to tolerate as a society in terms of our risk profile is something that I think we have to have a more mature discussion about. Unfortunately, in the news, it seems like, if there is one COVID death, it's too many. I was seeing this recently in a debate over reopening schools, and I forget who was commenting on this, but they were commenting on the fact that the death rate for people who are like K through 12, or under 20 for that matter, is lower than it is for COVID. So even assuming you catch it and you get it, your death rate is lower. Now, we obviously don't close K through 12 schools every year because of normal influenza, even though there's more of a death rate from standard influenza. But if there's one COVID death, that's unacceptable, even though we tolerate, a certain number of normal flu deaths, which seems totally odd.
It's even more excessive than that. It was Fauci who was saying, don't ignore the risks with kids, because even if for whatever the minimal fraction of a risk is that they die from it, even if they don't, there might be lasting conditions or issues from having survived it. Yeah. There's no question. I think people have lost the track of the initial stated objective.
Yeah.
And the whole diametric of the discussion has shifted now to the point where any deaths are too many. You want to minimize it at all costs, and if you have this discussion, you don't care about people dying, and that's how it's been phrased, and that's how it's been shaped, and it's not a discussion people can have. The only thing I'm looking out for now, and I'm predicting, it's only a matter of time before studies start coming out. I'm thinking this. I should think out loud. Before studies come out and say that extended periods of isolation coupled with high stress and unhealthy levels of disinfecting have actually made people more susceptible when things open up. I mean, it's only a matter of time before we start seeing studies that show this. And it's, what are we going to do? We could prevent all the COVID infections.
That's right.
It's just at what point does it become unsustainable?
We just need to have total cost accounting. We just need to look at all the costs in every possible dimension of cost. There's a cost to keeping kids out of school. They lose the environment of the learning. They lose the social interaction. It puts more strain on parents who can't work as effectively because now they're working from home and having to tend to the kids and trying to work. Like, that's going to be a challenge. It's going to reduce productivity, not to mention sanity.
Well, but you can't go to work because
apparently I can't raise any of these issues because I'm a bad person.
Well, no, they're going to frame it as like, oh, you're putting money over the value of life. I'll go one step further, because this is a discussion I had with someone who said, by defying or even questioning the authorities' instructions, you could actively be contributing to the death toll. And Barnes said it, everyone's saying it. Every policy decision has a real life and death impact. Every policy decision. And so it's not a question of pretending that, we're doing this for money. Let's just set aside the money issue. How many people are going to find out that they have advanced stages of cancer as a result of having not had basic medical care for the last 4 to 5, 6 months?
Because they're afraid to go to
routine checkups. And all these elective surgeries and that are going undone, and a lot of these elective surgeries are not quite so elective, especially to the person. A lot of these are fairly important, and so maybe we should talk about that. That's the thing.
Well, hold on. Well, I disagree. Well, honestly, this is be plain. I disagree with the number one, the effect on hospitalizations. I was here in New York, and my wife worked at the hospital, and I'm just going to be just straight up tell you. Her ward, she deals with newborn babies, and they had COVID patients in her ward. Like, it was crazy. We literally, there were field hospitals that weren't used. I will say that sparsely they were used, but not crazy. But even in her hospital, they had 7 floors, and usually they would just have like 1 floor for emergency room patients. At the end, at the peak, all 7 floors have COVID patients. So it wasn't overrun at the hospital. And we did experience that. And Italy experienced that too, where the hospitals got overrun. And that's why you see they had such a high death rate, because like you're saying, the car accident people and all those people couldn't go to the hospital. And they actually have a documentary where you see people one guy like broke his arm, and they called the hospital and were like, hey, we need an ambulance. And the only hospital that could take that guy was something like 2 hours away. So now he could possibly lose his arm because he can't get his arm, can't see a doctor. There were no hospital beds. So I also think when you look at this problem, there are 2 ways to look at the problem. You can look at it very specifically on particular issues, like one issue here. But then I think when you're trying to deal with this COVID problem, you're looking at it from a predictive model in terms of how are the rising hospitalization rates and how are all these things going to affect things in the future, not today. And we're looking at things today and not extrapolating it to the future. And I think the problem that we're coming into right now is that in Texas, I've looked at the hospitalization rate. In Texas, it's going extremely high. It is getting to the point where, like in Arizona's getting to the point where they're out of ICU beds, especially in Texas. There's 60,000 hospital beds. And as of yesterday, their hospitalization rate, that means people going into hospitals, staying overnight, they had about, 7,500 people in one day going to the hospitals. So if you only have 60,000 hospital beds in a state of 29 million people and 6,000 people per day are going into the hospital, in 10 days, you run out of hospital beds. That's why now they're building new hospitals, because they're trying to predict the model in the future. If this continues, if this trend continues without us, again, flattening the curve, then we're just going to have more and more people show up to the hospital. And eventually, there's a limited amount of hospital beds, a limited amount of doctors, and a limited amount of places where we can put people if this happens. So the from what I'm understanding is that they're trying to avoid the problem by putting these measures in place, and trying to avoid this problem is trying to flatten the curve. The curve is not flattened as of right now. They're trying to flatten it back to where it was. And even in New York, we still have a problem now. For instance, my wife in her ward, before, I think 2 weeks ago, they had no coronavirus patients. It was like everybody's celebrating. Now they're back up to 4 all of a sudden. And I think that's what's going on now. People are saying, well, we can now see the writing on the wall. And these things, and it's not where we're at today, but the professionals are trying to say, where are we going to be a month from now? And a month from now, it looks like a disaster. It just does.
Well, no, I think we all need to be doing predictive modeling. We all need to be looking in the future and trying to look at these relative rates and not take for granted that what is true today will be true in the future, especially with a disease that's capable of spreading. And, so I think your point is well raised. I take a look at these models too, and I've drawn a slightly more optimistic conclusion, but I think you're making the right kind of assessments. So I'll agree with you that far.
No, but I do think at a point you have government, whenever they can get more control, we can all agree, are going to take more control, right? The government, like if it can tell you to stay in your house now, so the government never gives up more control; it gets more control, and obviously it's public health crisis. So I do understand the fears of government overreach, which is 100% legitimate. But I think just in the short term, the virus to me just seems very, very serious, and I think it's not as overblown as I think people make it seem. I just think it's less understood because it's something new. And the next time we have something like this happens, maybe we'll act differently.
Which might be now, because apparently we might have a swine flu or bubonic plague. Apparently these are things that are happening in China as we speak. Well, Black Death. Well, the last time that happened, that worked out real well.
The fundamental problem, and I'm reading Tony Design's comment here: trust the people who actually understand science and how to math. If you haven't specifically been trained in it, don't try. You'll end up making egregiously false statements. Well, here's one problem. The people who've been making the predictions have been, on the one hand, the decisions that have led to policy that crippled the global economy and led to countless other deaths have been, revising, retracting, correcting. Flip side, they have not been respecting their own dictates. Flip side, the same governments who were imposing harsh lockdowns, etc., somehow find exceptions for social justice protests. The
hypocrisy on this is so real. It's like when the mayor of Chicago, I know I'm going back like 2 months now, when she was asked about her hair, it's like, well, my hair is important, because I appear on camera, I'm really important, and these protests are really important. That's a really good reason to do it. And even when it comes to like trusting the experts, like I can't even trust Fauci anymore, because Fauci had said, masks don't help. And then he said before Congress that the reason I said that was because we had a shortage. And I was concerned if I said masks help, that people would put a run on masks and it wouldn't be available to those who needed it. So he made that's what we call a lie. He knowingly made a materially false statement. And you say, well, I had really good reasons to lie. I'm like, well, okay, but now I can't trust you, because maybe now you think you have really good reasons to make the statements you're making now. So if you wanted to lie to me about, oh, masks aren't important. Oh, but I actually knew they were important by saying it because we wanted hospitals to have them, not you. I'm like, okay, well, now I can't even trust the experts. So while trusting the experts has some value, at this point, it's like I can't even trust them. So I'm unfortunately left in a position where I have to try to understand the math and the numbers myself, because the experts might be lying to me by their own admission.
here's secret squirrel. In the UK, field hospitals didn't get used because there was no one to staff them. Not sure that could be why they didn't get used in the US. We did have a staffing problem, but we had like a whole bunch of people come in from other cities.
Yeah. And New York State is now trying to put taxes on those people, which I find hilarious.
Fauci never said
for income
that.
Tax.
So here we have energy. Says Fauci never said that about masks, but for $2. Thank you, super for energy. But he did. He said that the reason why they were telling people masks were not effective was because they didn't want people to go out and have a run on the masks because healthcare providers needed them. So yeah, so he did make that admission that masks are effective, but the reason why they said they weren't effective was to protect us from going out and overrunning masks. So they lied to us to protect us. So I think that's the point. And
it's a fundamental problem. At some point, we're going to come to a crossroads where people are going to have to make a decision as to what risks they are willing to take, what rights they're willing to abandon in order to have a life that they believe is worth living. I mean, it's at some point, yes, lockdowns, quarantine, forced, sanitizing your hands every 5 minutes. At some point, closing down businesses, that's good. We'll save people from COVID. But the costs are going to be measurable on a small scale and immeasurable on a global scale. I mean, we don't even have to talk about the spill-off negative effects of what's happening, of what's going on across the world. But it becomes such a moral issue because we can quantify the COVID deaths relatively easily in theory. Nobody's going to analyze the demographics to see certain things about who is in fact the most vulnerable to this. You just go by numbers and make some rash moral judgment about people who think that we're not doing what is not right or the best thing, and then attack our ability to do it because we're not experts. But the bottom line, in Canada, 90% of the deaths have either been in or connected to long-term healthcare facilities. And so the question then is, unless you cripple the economy indefinitely and ignore the consequences, you can't just say that there are none. You're going to ignore them because you've placed something above the consequences. Unless you're ready to do that, the question is, how do you maintain a functional society while protecting the most vulnerable? And I don't have to be an expert to think that we haven't done that. I don't have to be an expert to think that in New York, Cuomo shouldn't have been sending recovering patients back to old persons' homes. And maybe that accounts for why their numbers are dropping now, because they had such a spike in the earlier days. I mean, at some point, we're measuring this in 2-month intervals or 4-month intervals. When we measure it over 10-year intervals, everybody might end up being the same. And then the only question is, what will have been the cost in the interim?
But you would agree, more information gives you better decision-making ability, right? Because I think you're right. I think we have this virus. We know it's spreading effective around, and we know that it could have negative effects. So I think it seems like everybody's grasping at different straws, and nobody knows really what to do. And now, as you're saying, the more information we get, the more narrow our response could be.
Here's my problem, Nate. The more information we get, it seems that the more broad the response is getting. We know things now, and now 5 months later, now face masks are going to become mandatory in public spaces. And then if you question this, you're being accused of contributing to the death toll. I mean, the thing is this: face masks. I mean, other than the fact that the boxes, some of them. I read an article explaining why the face mask boxes say that they don't protect from COVID. By and large, most people agree that in higher risk areas, a proper face mask is going to work.
Yes.
But now I see people walking on the streets wearing face masks, and at some point, it ceases being an actual measurable preventative measure, and it becomes a statement, like the mayor of New York is suggesting that wearing a face mask is. It's what it says to people. And then you realize just people are not fighting for results; they're fighting for the impression of results. And it becomes a policy decision, and it becomes a question of which policies you want to support and which politicians you want to support. But the idea that there can be no discussion on it when the information is at best contradictory and at worst misleading. I mean, I'm not a subject that is just going to have to be told and browbeaten into following what is it that the flavor of the day is in terms of medical advice.
Well, hold on. Wasn't there, because I know for Fauci, the reason why he made that admission about face masks, because there was a definitive study that came out that said face masks were 50% effective for if you're wearing them or you have them, you're 50% less likely to get COVID, right? And that's why he was challenged. They were like, well, hold on. The study that you guys have, all this stuff, it says they are effective. So if face masks are effective, maybe not 100% effective, but 50% effective, it would make me, it would just lead me to believe that good public policy would say we should wear face masks, because we now have data to suggest that they are effective 50%. You know, you're half as likely, you're less likely to catch coronavirus if you're wearing a face mask. So do you believe that science is not accurate, or do you believe that's just overall?
Under what circumstances? I agree. You'd be 50% less likely to catch it in the environment where you might be susceptible of catching it. Do I have to wear a face mask in my house because of that study? No, that's the other thing. There's no question, under certain circumstances, it is not only logical, but it's common sense. If you're in an enclosed area with call it poor circulation, but to go from there to now say it's public policy that you have to wear them in public areas, open or closed. I mean, it's starting with closed areas in most places, but it's in open areas in other places. And then what? And then you have police walking around giving tickets to people not wearing face masks in public, while the very same government is knowingly shipping recovering patients to old persons' homes. I mean, it is again, Parkinson's law of triviality. In Montreal, we had the RCMP going around parks issuing tickets, while the very problem itself is not in parks. And so you get people getting $800 tickets for having backyard barbecues with their family because they're violating the 10-person rule or the 5-person rule. Where if there's a study that shows that backyard barbecues and open air gatherings is actually contributing, okay, but what is it? It's a level of frustration, and there's no level of discussion that you can have, because the experts can say what they want and nobody can challenge it, and then the experts can change their opinion 2 months later, and they can't be accused of having gotten it wrong. They just learned more, and in the meanwhile, everyone else is just left in the crosshairs.
It's interesting because I like for the backyard barbecue. Like, I know there was one in Texas where there was a surprise 30th birthday party. They had a backyard barbecue, and 18 people got infected with coronavirus because one person had it but didn't know they had it, and 18 people got infected. Right now, that's trivial and anecdotal, but I think it gives you that suspect where, you know, what are we doing? I know here in New York, when you walk outside, they tell you to wear face masks because, let's say, if you're going into elevators and stuff. But if you're outside, like when we're going outside to the beach, they don't tell you to wear face masks, because I think, you know, it's different for different. And I think we now learned that from the science. But I don't know. We're still playing this kind of as you go, because this has honestly been the first global pandemic that anybody has seen in their lifetimes. The last one was in the 1920s for the Spanish flu. So I do think your point is well-meaning. But I think on the other side too, it's kind of the preventative. We know that this spreads in a particular way. We know that people are susceptible in this way. So let's try to prevent people from getting it by limiting, 10 people, by not doing it. And we know that when people do violate this, we have these particular events, like it happened in Texas, the 30th birthday party where 18 people get infected who weren't, and because of the event. Let's limit those events because we don't want to have that type of spread. So I don't know.
I apologize. Can I jump in? I know I've been not silent for a while because I wanted to look up the quote, since someone in Super Chat said he didn't say that. I'm like, okay.
Well, I'm gonna
yeah, I know he did, but I'm gonna find the exact quote. So I'll just quote it back to you so that we all know. This is from the House hearing on June the 23rd, the exchanges between Representative McKinley and Dr. Fauci, and it's at 2 hours and 6 minutes in the transcript if you want to look it up later. The question said, "Thank you. You said it's late and raised March 31st, and the president relies on your expertise. Do you regret modify the people more forcefully to wear masks earlier?" And here's Fauci. "Okay, we'll play that game. Let me explain to you what happened back then. It's more than yes or no by the tone of your question. I do not regret that. Let me explain what happened. At the time, there was a lot of equipment that our healthcare providers needed to put themselves daily in arm's way of taking care of people who are ill. We did not want to divert masks and PPE away from them to be used by the people." Okay, so that's a direct quote from Fauci. So don't tell me that Fauci didn't lie. He did lie. I have the transcripts. So you're wrong, Super Chat people. Don't at me. If you come after the big game, you better be right, baby.
And Zen Lizard, guess what? That's the way science works. Well, Zen, we're seeing that the problem is when politics and science cross paths, other issues become it's almost like science seeds the way to politics. There's no question. First of all, I've been following these rules, and I will follow the rules. It doesn't mean that I'm not that we're not allowed as people who are affected, whose civil liberties, that I'm not allowed asking questions and
of course,
and also remarking on how it seems that the science changes with the politics. We're allowed observing that without being accused of being anti-science, because I'm not. The problem is I'm more science than I think most are. I'm more science in that if mass gatherings are not to be permitted in the name of the pandemic, they're not to be permitted. If they are going to be tolerated for protest, well, then you can't say that they can't be tolerated for
a birthday party,
political rallies.
Yeah,
and you're not giving tickets for 10,000. And if you have a prime minister attending a massive rally of 50,000 people, you don't go and pick on the only guy who you know is going to pay your $800 ticket because he's the easy target. So there's a number of issues here. And then the other issue is how long is this sustainable for? And what is the cost of it? And if nobody's asking those questions, say follow science for now, and hope that the government can keep printing money, and hope that somehow think that this is going to work out given the current trajectory, not of the disease necessarily, but of everything. Well, I mean that's fine, and I agree that these are not easy decisions as policymakers that they have to make. But it's a discussion that we as people whose civil rights are affected by it are entitled to have, and we are entitled to point out, if not the inconsistencies, the outright hypocrisies and the misinformation coming from those who are apparently giving it to us in the name of science.
And let's also, just for the crowd, let's also understand the difference between saying we want to challenge whether these things are correct or whether these things are actually needed, versus us saying that we want deaths, right? Nobody's here saying we want people to die. We're just saying, is there a better way to do it? And if what we're being told makes logical sense. So, I think, like, I question the fact that masks early. I question the fact that, some of these measures I do question, but I think there's a difference between questioning the efficiency of them and not taking the disease serious are two different things. So I think people need to understand that that's not what we're doing. We're saying that there may be a better way, and we think the government may not be competent enough to explain it to us. Let me read these two super chats. 2012 Jameson is really good. An expert has no fiduciary duty to anyone. Talk to your doctor and let them help you navigate this time. They have a duty owed to you. Stay safe. Thank you, 2012 Jameson. Says, talk to your doctor, baby. And here's Stupid Horror Energy coming after my man, Uncivil Law, out of context. Here's what Fauci said, quote, right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks. You should think of healthcare providers who are needing them and the people who are ill. Stupid Horror Energy. Smack back.
It's not. It's a zero, by the way. It's not an O. Okay. Now, incidentally, I have to get out of here because my battery is going to go dead, and I have to go. I have to run. This went 24 minutes longer. Everybody. I think just to close it off. I mean, I think that the bottom line is there's a lot of common sense in this. There's a lot of science stuff that is going to be beyond the pay grade of everyday citizens. But people are entitled to have a discussion, and yes, to the extent that they're not coughing on fruits in supermarkets, to question, not the efficacy, but also then the penalties for not wearing a scarf over your mouth in public.
Yes,
you don't have to be a scientist to have these discussions, especially when they affect you so personally and so radically. And I'm not talking about defying authority, conventional authority, or even the authority of the day. But that does not. But there are real decisions that have to be made and real discussions that have to be had, because it's not sustainable the way it is. And if anybody thinks that it's sustainable and not going to cause exponentially more serious problems than the virus could have ever caused, well, these are policy decisions which are going to play out over the course of time.
But before you go, I wanted to show you guys. I wanted to ask you guys about.
If I may, I mean, I still find that statement very misleading, because Fauci at the time knew that masks would be effective, but we might not have known that. Can I think of a reason that a person who's in a healthcare field might need a mask, but I wouldn't? Yes, because they're in a confined environment with nothing but COVID patients all day long. So their exposure is much higher than it would be for me walking in a store. So it would be perfectly tenable logically to say, no, an average person doesn't need a mask because you're not at risk from exposure, unlike a person who's doing nothing but breathing corona all day long. But that isn't the reason he said that. He said it because oh, these people are better than you because they need the protection and you don't, you lowly person, as I referred to in the clip. So, you know, you might say that it's not a lie, but for me, it was a lie because I can think of reasons why it would be true that healthcare people would need to wear one because their risk is such. I mean, I don't wear PPE normally in my life, and doctors normally do because they're at risk from catching things because they're in a hospital. So normally I don't wear PPE. So of course, like, okay, they need to wear PPE. They have exposure, you don't. But that wasn't the reason. He knew better, and he lied.
Yeah, he did lie. But I will say this, and thanks again for the super chat, Stupid Horror Energy. Thank you again for the super chat. I do think he lied, but I do think your point is well taken. I do want to show you guys this before we get out of here. What I did was to show you how much of a nerd I am. I'm like super with Excel. So what I did was I just took the numbers and just said, well, if we take the U.S. numbers and compare them to other countries, their rate of infection, their rate of deaths, we can actually see what the U.S. numbers would look like if we impose, let's say, the per capita death rate of Sweden, of whatever. And if we apply them to the US population, we can see, well, if we were Sweden, we would have this much deaths and these many cases versus if we were the United States. So here's the United States being compared to itself. We're equal. And here is the United States being compared to something like South Korea, where if we were South Korea, we'd have, based on their rate of infections and stuff, remember, they got their case the same day we got our first case. We would have 80,000 infections and 1,800 deaths versus 2 million almost 3 million infections and 100,000 deaths. So, but again, you know, there's a lot more to go into these numbers. A lot of people talk about Sweden, like, why didn't we do what Sweden did? Well, if we did what Sweden did, we would actually have more deaths, even though we'd have less cases. And the last one is New Zealand. If we did what New Zealand did, New Zealand New Zealand did strict lockdowns. They just said whatever the scientists say, we're going to do what they say. And if we were New Zealand, we'd have 100,000 cases. So you know, no one understands why you have these vastly different. I don't want to say indicators, different results based on country. But it seems like you know, what are some places like New Zealand doing right that we're not doing wrong? What are some places like, you know, Sweden doing right to get less cases, but they have more deaths? And you can see this even with Italy. So that's the question. It seems like some people are getting it right. It seems like some people are getting it wrong. The U.S. is in a worse position than even Brazil, if you look at the numbers. So right now, I think we're still in that how to figure this thing out role. You know what I'm saying? And I wish there was a magic pill, but no one knows, not even the experts. And that's what we're still trying to figure out. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. I mean, and we are. The funny thing is, everybody has the same objective. It's to to some extent to minimize the spread, and at some point also to ensure that society can continue to function. It's and it's the balance. It's a policy decision that is going to have casualties on one end and the other, and that's what people don't necessarily fully appreciate, which they have to appreciate.
I would definitely expect the email, Jameson, but I do want to let Viva go because Viva does have to go. And I'm so sorry.
I'm half hour past my time. Okay, people.
So listen, guys. Go ahead, Viva. Close us out.
Nice to see you guys.
No, close us out. Go ahead. Tell us the bye-bye.
We're going to end everyone, be kind to each other and listen to each other, even if you disagree with the other person. Peace out.
Peace out.
Boom. End broadcast.
I can see my pulse.
Yeah, that was a very, very, very good conversation today, guys.